Hey, lifers, Dustin here, and right before the start of college football games this past weekend, on the official opening weekend of college football, there was a really weird story. There are a lot of reasons why I can imagine somebody stepping away from broadcasting college football games, but the idea that the game is too violent and they no longer wanted to be a cheerleader of violence in the sport is one I don't think I would have ever suspected. Last week it was announced, though apparently it had happened a few months earlier, that Ed Cunningham, who was a broadcaster for ABC and ESPN, I actually watched a lot of the games he broadcasted. I actually really liked him. I thought he gave pretty good insight into things. It was announced that he had stepped away from his probably extremely well-paying job at ESPN broadcasting college football games along with Mike Patrick, who's been doing it forever, in order to not be a cheerleader for the violence going on in the game, specifically when it comes to concussions, head injuries, and eventually CTE. Now, Cunningham is no stranger to the sport of college football. He was a co-captain on Washington's 1991 national championship team. He's been a player, a coach, and a broadcaster in the sport for a very long time, his entire adult life, right? It is kind of strange that now he chooses to leave. I'm not quite sure what happened between last season and this season to make that decision salient to him, if that makes sense. I don't know why now instead of a long time ago. Concussions have always been around. I asked my parents, like, when you guys were growing up, did you know about concussions? And they said, yeah, we knew about concussions, but it wasn't a big deal back then like it is now. And obviously they didn't know about CTE or anything. Although, I don't know why people are, when they found out about CTE over this last decade, were really shocked. Did anyone think that a concussion, which is a bruise on your brain, that taking all of those hits for decades in some cases, when you're talking about professional players, taking those hits on the head was good? Did they think brain bruising was fine? It seems to me that it's always been an issue. I remember being a little kid and getting dinged up in games and practices and just being like, this can't be good for my brain. So the idea that these people for decades just thought they were just nothing is always kind of weird to me. But in any case, Cunningham decided to walk away from the broadcasting booth because he felt like he was encouraging the players or the sport where players were getting brutally injured. He talked about in an interview with, I believe, the New York Times. I'll link the article down below. But he talked in that video about, you know, watching a guy hurt his leg, and then they would go to commercial break, and they would come back, and there would just be a new guy out there. Which, again, there's always been that, so I'm not quite sure why the switch was flipped. It's something that is actually a growing concern with the sport, and this is a video I've actually kind of wanted to make for a while now, but I never really had an entry point into it, and this situation gave me a unique chance to talk about it, and that is college football, but football in general in this country, in danger? What I mean by that is the more people start talking about concussions, long-term health benefits, and things like that, I wonder if it's going to start outweighing some of what we consider the benefits, like hard work and teaching guys camaraderie and different backgrounds and patience and trust and all of the good things that are typically associated with football, along with the athleticism, along with giving a lot of kids a ride out of a place they probably wouldn't normally get out of, with college scholarships and the potential for life-changing money in the NFL. I wonder if some of those benefits are going to start being outweighed by parents who at a young age decide that they don't want their kid playing football because at some point they could end up really hurt, and not just in a like broken bone kind of way hurt, but seriously hurt and have their lives cut drastically short, either by suicide that happens with damaged brains, or people like Ed McMahon who can't walk, who basically have Parkinson's at a much, much younger age than they theoretically should, probably because of all the CTE and hard hits that they have. It is a really interesting conversation that's going on kind of under the surface in the country right now, and I do wonder if it will impact the sport long term. The more studies that they conduct on players, the more damning it kind of looks like for the sport. I'm not quoting anything specifically here because I can't quite remember what it was, but I believe I just saw a report where they tested 20 brains of former athletes, former football players from both college and the NFL, and found that 19 of the 20 had CTE, which is not a good look for the sport. And of course, we know that the NFL for years tried to bury the information and bury the tests and all of the studies that were coming out about it because they knew that it would end up hurting their product. Now, I'm not worried about college football in probably my lifetime, to be honest with you. I think it'll be fine over the next 30 years, 40 years. What I'm worried about is the kids that are growing up. Their kids are probably going to play football less than what my generation's children will. And then their kids are going to play football less, and their kids are going to play football less. And I wonder if it'll get to a point to where programs are going to have to close because there's just not enough scholarships, or high school programs will have to stop sponsoring football because it's not really worth it when 37 kids come out to be on the team. It's a really weird, long-form thing that I'm kind of talking about here, not something over the next decade or generation or two, but something probably like the 22nd century. Will college football be borderline obsolete? Now, obviously, I certainly hope not. I think it is the greatest sport in the history of the world. I genuinely do. There's no other sport that can elicit all of the emotions that me and you go through every single Saturday, both with teams we love, teams we hate, and teams we are completely indifferent at. I don't care about Tennessee or Georgia Tech, but I was emotionally invested in that game last night. I'm not entirely certain. It makes me really, really sad to think about that my future generations won't be able to enjoy this game that I love so much, but college football and football in general have always kind of had this debate. I remember famously Theodore Roosevelt threatened to make the game illegal in 1905 unless they implemented some sort of safety regulations and safety changes, which included things like helmets and padding, which was a good move. So they're working with targeting right now. Seems like as of right now, they're starting to get some of that right more often than not. Because in the past, there have been a lot of those targeting calls that I think were BS, but were somehow upheld. This year, notably in the Michigan-Florida game, I saw 2 or 3 that were not targeting. They were called targeting on the field, and then they were overruled. Players were allowed to stay in the game. Everything was fine. So if we can find that fine line between competition and targeting, I think that would go a long way. If we start teaching our kids really young ages the best way to tackle. When I was in high school, my high school coach told me, he's like, you're going to break your neck the way you're trying to tackle, because I was just diving at people. He was like, you dive at someone's legs like that, you're going to break your neck. You dive at someone's head, like you're going to have a concussion. Their knee is going to hit you in the head, and you're going to be out of the game. So there are those safety measures being taken at earlier and earlier ages, and I think that is a really good way to kind of implement good tackling, better tackling at an earlier age. But that's just my thoughts on it. I just thought this would be a really interesting kind of conversation to have in the comment section. So please do let me know what your thoughts on the matter are. Are you worried about the future of college football and football in general? Do you think it's too great of a sport to ever completely die out? Like I said, I don't think it'll ever completely die out, but I am worried about the spread of it dwindling. I'm afraid we have officially lived through the golden age of college football, and now it's kind of on the decline. We're seeing attendance numbers dropping. I'm just not really sure why. Maybe it's things like Alabama, Ohio State, and USC always being at the top of things, and people feel like there's not enough competition within college football itself. Maybe it's people weary of football and dropping away. I'm not entirely certain, but let me know your thoughts on the CTE college football potential problem in the future down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to give it a big thumbs up. You can also click the circle right there in order to subscribe or watch any of the other videos over there to the right that YouTube has suggested for you. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, until next time. A broadcaster for ABC and ESPN. I actually watched a lot of the games he broadcasted. I actually really liked him. I thought he gave pretty good insight into things. It was announced that he had stepped away from his probably extremely well-paying job at ESPN broadcasting college football games along with Mike Patrick, who's been doing it forever, in order to broadcasting college football games. But the idea that the game is too violent and they no longer wanted to be a cheerleader of violence in the sport is one I don't think I would have ever suspected. Last week it was announced, though apparently it had happened a few months earlier, that Ed Cunningham, who was a 1991 national championship team, he's been a player, a coach, and a broadcaster in the sport for a very long time, his entire adult life, right? It is kind of strange that now he chooses to leave. I'm not quite sure what happened between last season and this season to not be a cheerleader for the violence going on in the game, specifically when it comes to concussions, head injuries, and eventually CTE. Now, Cunningham is no stranger to the sport of college football. He was a co-captain on Washington. Hey, lifers, Dustin here, and right before the start of college football games this past weekend, on the official opening weekend of college football, there was a really, really weird story. There are a lot of reasons why I can imagine somebody stepping away from